The Assembly Committee on Government Affairs will come to order. Madam Secretary, please call roll.
Assemblywoman Anderson.
Present.
Assemblywoman Black.
Here.
Assemblywoman Brown May.
Here.
Assemblywoman Considine.
Present.
Assemblywoman Dickman.
Here.
Assemblywoman Duran.
Here.
Assemblyman Ellison.
Present.
Assemblywoman Martinez.
Present.
Assemblyman Matthews.
Here.
Assemblyman MacArthur.
Here.
Assemblywoman Thomas.
Here.
Assemblywoman Torres.
Here.
Chair Flores.
Present. Madam Secretary, please let the record reflect that all members are present. We have a quorum. Members, this morning, as you know, should be relatively short. Obviously, I want you to engage with thoughtful dialogue, but I mean short as in we just have one item on the agenda, and it's a presentation by the Las Vegas Metro Police Department. I think most of you probably have now met Chuck Calloway, the director, but if not, this will be an opportunity for you to reach out, establish a relationship with him. I would remind members of the audience, or better said, those that are following us virtually, that every member has a unique setup, which is why you'll see us looking in different directions. Sometimes we have more than one monitor and we're looking at documents in front of us. I want to remind the members to please keep your microphone on mute unless we are speaking, and that you please keep your camera on unless you have something you have to handle. Just give me a heads up that you'll be turning it off. With that, for those of you wishing to speak in public comment, we'll be doing that at the end of the meeting, as we always do. And with that, I'd like to welcome Mr. Calloway and open up the presentation by the Las Vegas Metro Police Department. Good morning and welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Chuck Calloway. I'm the Director of Intergovernmental Services for Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. It's a privilege to be here today in front of your committee to talk about our police department, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. I typically do this presentation each legislative session. In fact, the presentation you'll see today, I did a couple weeks ago in Assembly Judiciary, and I've done it in past legislative sessions before this committee. Was scheduled a week or so ago, but unfortunately, due to getting my COVID shot rescheduled, I had to cancel. So I thank you, Mr. Chair, for your ability to be flexible with me presenting. With that, I'm hoping everyone can see the presentation on your screen, or do I need to click something to get that up?
On my end, I am not yet seeing it, Mr. Calloway, but you may have to share your screen. Cindy, can you please help him with that? Thank you. Your screen sharing is starting.
Can you see it now?
And yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a lot of ground to cover, so I'm going to talk fast and provide you with a very high-level overview of our agency, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. If there's specific questions that I don't have the answer for you today, I will get you an answer for sure. So as we move forward, I apologize if I'm going quickly, but I'm respectful of your time. So very quickly, a history of Las Vegas Metro. We were founded in 1973 by an act of the state legislature. We're one of the few police departments in the country that's actually a consolidation of your county sheriff's office and your local Las Vegas City Police Department. We are under the authority of an elected sheriff who's elected by the residents of Clark County. The current sheriff, as you know, is Sheriff Joe Lombardo. He is the 7th elected sheriff of LVMPD. I've had the honor throughout my career. I've worked for Metro for, this is my 32nd year, and I've had the honor of working for 5 different sheriffs in my career with Metro. Like any large agency, we have values, mission statement, and goals. This recently was updated this last year by the Sheriff's Leadership Group. It's a group of folks on our agency that are chosen to participate in leadership training. They're the future leaders of our department. and they actually came up with the vision statement that you see in front of you. Obviously, I won't go through it in detail, but our vision is to be the safest community in America. Basic facts about the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. And as I get into statistics, I will say this too. We are the 10th largest police department in the country, and our numbers change on a daily basis. The numbers that are on this slide I put together in late January, preparing for the Assembly Judiciary presentation. So some of these numbers may change. For example, we may have people retire today or leave the agency, but the numbers that you see are pretty accurate. Currently, we have about 3,301 police officers, 1,357 civilians, and a total of about 4,658 full-time employees. In the detention center, we have 929 corrections officers, 346 civilians, 33 county staff for a total of 1,308. Our department oversees approximately 7,560 square miles, and we serve a population of over 2 million residents and typically about 43 million tourists. Obviously, last year with the COVID impacts, those tourist numbers declined. And again, due to COVID, our special event numbers dropped significantly, but on a typical year, a normal year prior to COVID, we were seeing about 7,806 special events. These are your events like Electric Daisy Carnival, concerts, conventions, NASCAR, New Year's Eve, marathons, various sporting events that our officers have to go out and maintain safety at these events. Often the entity that's putting the event on will pay the overtime costs for those events for officers to participate. But in some cases, like for New Year's Eve, for example, that cost to provide safety for New Year's Eve is part of our normal budget process. Even with COVID, you could see that surprisingly, we still had over almost 6,000 events in 2020. I think the majority of those events occurred either prior to March pandemic, and then after the pandemic, when things started to open up, we had strip issues, which I'll talk about in a little bit, involving crime, where some of the hotels down there hired officers to work overtime to address crime issues on the strip, in addition to our normal patrols on the strip. And then, of course, even though there weren't fans in the stadium, we still had to maintain public safety for events such as Raiders games and whatnot. So we still had a significant number of events, even with COVID. Our communications center averages about 3 million calls for service a year, about 1.1 million 911 calls. We currently have 107 dispatchers and 80 call takers. Average response time for priority calls, those are your 911 calls, are around 6 minutes. That's the average time. You may call 911 and we might be there in a minute or two, or you may call 911 and it may take us 8 minutes to get there. Obviously, each situation is unique, but on average, 6 minutes is our response for priority events. Our patrol services, the men and women who are out in uniform handling calls for service, obviously that's the bread and butter of our agency. Those are the folks that when you get your car broken into or your house burglarized or you have a issue in your neighborhood, then you call 911 or you call the non-emergency number. These are the men and women that are responding out there. We have 10 area commands that cover the valley. We also have resident officers that cover areas such as Searchlight, Jean, and Logandale. And then, of course, we have a substation at the airport. Our total jurisdiction, just to put it in context, is about the size of the state of New Jersey. Our traffic section, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department's traffic section, handles about 22,000 traffic collisions a year, and usually about half of those involve some type of injury. That number was slightly up from 2019. You can see the numbers on the slide. We had 98 fatal traffic accidents in 2020 compared to 111 in 2019. And then we had about 3,846 DUI arrests, again, slightly up from 2019. I believe we've had, don't quote me on this, but looking at the numbers the other day, I think we've had 16 fatal accidents. Yes, unless somebody unfortunately passed away on the roadways today, I think as of yesterday, we've had 16 fatal accidents in our jurisdiction this year. I want to talk briefly about the Office of Intergovernmental Services, which is my office. I'm the director of that office, and I'm your liaison. I'm here for you. I work year-round on legislative, both on the federal level and the state level. I serve on interim committees. My office, our whole job is to act as a liaison with local, state, federal government, and also other special interest groups that have questions or concerns or constituent issues or want to engage with law enforcement. I represent the sheriff and the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, obviously, to those entities. Our primary goal of my office is to serve you and to work the legislative session to help with bills that impact public safety. On a normal legislative session, my office tracks about 400 bills that have some type of impact on our agency or on public safety in general. And then after the session is over, we make sure that whatever changes to the law took place, that our officers receive the training that's involved in that our policies are updated to reflect that those changes in the law. We also assist you with constituent issues. In fact, just yesterday, I was handling a constituent issue for one of your colleagues. And then zoning and planning, when the economy's good, we have businesses coming in, and what are the impacts potentially to public safety when, you know, you're going to build a certain business in town. And so we provide feedback and work on zoning and planning issues at the local government level. And we also assist with local ordinances. And then a big part of what we do is also dealing with our foreign consulates. I actually currently have Officer Sam Diaz is TDY to my office. He's permanently assigned to the Office of Community Engagement. And we've had a very good relationship with the new Mexican consulate, Mr. Rodriguez. In fact, we participated with them in some training for the matricula cards so that officers know what those look like and know when they're valid and what they're looking at. We've also done some training on gang awareness. He's been very helpful with us on getting information out to his community members on certain things that are occurring that Metro wants the public aware of. And often what we see is folks from other countries come to the United States to visit as tourists, and then they're either victims of crime or in very rare cases, they may be accused of a crime themselves. And when those situations occur, we work with the consulate to make sure that their countries of origin are notified, and that if, you know, in many cases, it's something simple like they've lost a passport or their property was stolen, and we work to try to help them get a report and recover their property when possible. And then we also work with dignitaries who come to visit. We don't do dignitary protection in my office. We facilitate tours of the Fusion Center, the forensics lab, those types of things. And then, as I said, I participate, my office participates in interim committees. I currently have the pleasure of being the vice chair on the Nevada Sentencing Commission. I serve on the Advisory Commission to the Administration of Justice. It's kind of defunct now, but I've been a member of the Attorney General's Substance Abuse Working Group, and I'm currently on the Regional Homeless to Housing Committee. There may be a couple others, but those are some of the things that my office does in these areas. We have a number of specialized sections on our department. Most people, when they think of Metro, they think of our patrol units, men and women in uniform. But as you know, we have our detective bureaus, we have our K-9 units, our SWAT team, our forensics lab, our CSI people. And just to, I guess, tout the good work that our detective bureau does, we are currently at about a 92.6% solvability rate for homicides, which is extremely high compared to the national average. The national average is about 61%. So if you think about that for a second, if someone commits a homicide in another jurisdiction, there's on average about a 40% chance that they're going to get away with that crime. If they commit a homicide in our jurisdiction, there's less than a 9% chance that they're going to get away with that crime. And I think that's kudos to the Detective Bureau that often is working around the clock to solve those homicides and make sure that the perpetrators are held accountable. Our search and rescue section, as you know, the sheriff is responsible for search and rescue in Clark County. In 2020, all the numbers that I'm showing you, by the way, are 2020 numbers. We had 111 search and rescue operations, 66 helicopter rescues. We often get people that come to town and they're not familiar with the desert environment. They want to go out to Red Rock and hike, or they go to maybe out into the Gold Springs area, and they start to hike around, and then they don't have water with them, or it gets hot out there, they get lost. And so then our search and rescue team and our volunteers go out and assist with helping those people. We had 144 flight hours last year, and we had about 127 people that were saved, that were victims of those circumstances where they got lost in the desert or needed help. We'll talk briefly about our Southern Nevada Counterterrorism Center. It serves as the state's designated fusion center. If you have not seen it, it's housed in our headquarters building on the 3rd floor on Alta and Martin Luther King Boulevard. I would encourage you, when the session's over, to come visit with me, and I'll take you on a tour of it and show you exactly what goes on there. It houses the Southern Nevada Joint Terrorism Task Force, which is made up of law enforcement representatives from a number of different agencies, both state, local, and federal. They investigate what we call SARS, which is suspicious activity reporting. For example, let's say somebody went and purchased, the components to potentially make a bomb, ammonium nitrate and gunpowder and different things, and someone reported that to us. Our detectives would then look into that and investigate it and see if there's a possible terrorism or domestic terrorism nexus there. The work they do is very important to keep our community safe on the terrorism front. And as you know, what we look at as terrorism since 9/11 traditionally is changing, and we're seeing a much higher level of domestic terrorism in our country at this time. And so what the Fusion Center does, they play a very important role. And we can't do it without the public. I've got here on the slide, as you can see, the See Something, Say Something campaign. We rely on tips from the public and people reporting things that just don't look right to them. And it really helps us in our endeavors to keep the public safe. MACTAC is a program that we put together after the horrible a group of terrorists took over hotels in Mumbai and killed a number of people before they were finally stopped. And we realized that there was a potential threat for that to occur in our jurisdiction with the number of hotels that we have. So we sent officers to Mumbai to evaluate that situation in 2009, and then come back and put together training that is considered a standard training program around the country now. The officers give advanced tactical response training to dealing with active shooters. And not only do we train our officers in this type of training, we also conduct training for other entities, such as the school district or local government entities, so that they know how to react to unfortunate situation, such as an active shooter. And probably, as we all know, the worst scenario that we've ever had was the October 1 incident, where a lot of the MACTAC training was employed during that situation as well. Our funding situation for Metro is outlined in NRS 280. NRS 280 puts in statute how Metro is funded. And I would say, if you look at all law enforcement agencies in the state, and maybe I'll go so far as to say all agencies in the state, I think we're at the top of the tier when it comes to transparency on our budget. We have monthly Fiscal Affairs Committee meetings. Those meetings are, the Fiscal Affairs Committee meetings are open to the public, and the committee members are 2 members from the City Council, 2 members from the County Commission, and a citizen chair at large who operate the Fiscal Affairs Committee. Donations, budgetary decisions, all of those things go through the Fiscal Affairs Committee for review. As I said, these meetings are open to the public for participation. All of our budget is posted online at lvmpd.com. If you have any questions about our budget at all, I would encourage you to go there and where you can look at basically line by line what's involved in Metro's budget. I want to talk about police reform, and there's a lot to cover here. For over a decade, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department has been actively engaged in police reform. In fact, I think that my personal opinion is that we're years ahead of other police departments in the country when it comes to reform. And now, as we talk about this stuff, I'm not going to tell you we're perfect, and I'm not going to tell you that we can't improve and do better. And obviously, we certainly can. But going back to November 2011, the Review Journal, many of you probably remember if you were in Las Vegas at that time, that the Review Journal did a series on Metro's use of force. And quite frankly, it was a bad story for us. It showed that we had a problem with use of deadly force, and we had too many officer-involved shootings, and many of them could have been, in fact, probably you could say most of them could have been prevented. So we knew that if we didn't take action to fix ourselves, that the Department of Justice was going to come in. There was already talk about a possible consent decree on our agency. And so Sheriff Gillespie at the time took it upon himself and was proactive to reach out to the Department of Justice to collaborate with the COPS office. And we engaged in a collaborative reform model, which was the first time this has ever occurred in the country. As many of you know, if you pay attention to dissent decrees, they're very costly, and most 99% of the time they don't accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. But a collaborative reform model, on the other hand, is us working hand in hand with the Department of Justice. They sent a team out in 2011, and they completely reviewed shootings that had taken place on our agency going back to the period where we were founded. They made a number of recommendations, a total of 75 recommendations of how we could improve as an agency and reduce officer-involved shootings. And we worked to complete all of those recommendations. I'm going to talk quickly about some of the things that were done. First, we established an Office of Internal Oversight and Constitutional Policing. We completely overhauled our use of force policy at the time with stakeholder input. We had input from the ACLU and a number of other stakeholders. We were one of the first agencies in the country to put the sanctity of life into our policy. We implemented mandatory training for all officers on de-escalation, reality-based training, fair and impartial policing, and dealing with the mentally ill. We created a CERT and FIT team, which, to talk briefly about that process, the CERT team is a critical incident review team, and these two teams are it's a bifurcated process. They work independently of each other. They don't commingle or communicate in their efforts. The CERT team, their job is to look at anytime we have a use of deadly force, they look at, was policy broken, were there training issues? They look at it from an internal perspective to see if officers followed proper procedure and protocol, or if they violated policy, or if there were training issues. The FIT team, on the other hand, looks at it from a criminal standpoint. They determine if the officer's actions violated the law. At the conclusion of their investigations, the FIT team will submit their findings to the district attorney's office, where the district attorney's office, based on that investigation, will make a determination of whether or not to prosecute officers if there were laws broken in the officer's actions. The CERT team, on the other hand, will do a robust report which outlines any training deficiencies, any policy issues, and then we work as an agency to address those, either through revising our training, revising policy, discipline for the officers if they violated policy, and making sure that those same mistakes, doing our best to make sure those same mistakes don't happen again in the future. One of the things that's come out of this process that, again, is rare across the country is we do a timely release of information to the public. Within 72 hours, we do a press conference where we release body camera footage that we have. We will give an overview of the event, and then we have the media present to ask questions. And we've also, through the Office of Community Engagement and through community policing in general at our area commands, the Sheriff's Multicultural Advisory Committee, we're constantly working to try to strengthen community partnerships. And that's obviously a very ongoing process that we constantly strive to work on. As a result of some of these efforts, and again, I'm not going to tell you we're perfect. We got a long ways to go. But overall, since 2010, we've reduced officer-involved shootings approximately 36%. I believe that we have overall improved community relationships. As a result, LVMPD has been considered a national model when it comes to the collaborative reform process. We've had other agencies across the country reach out to us. I believe Chicago was one that reached out to us requesting information so that they themselves could try to get involved in a collaborative reform process in their own agencies. And as I said, and will say again, more work needs to be done in these areas. And we're a very progressive agency that is constantly working to improve. The entire report on the collaborative reform model, there are actually 3 reports. There's the initial report, which provides the recommendations. There's the midpoint report, which gives a status of where we were. And then there's the final report that shows what of the recommendations were completed and the DOJ's opinion of what we did or their review of what we did. All of these reports can be found at the link that's provided here on this screen. I want to talk about body-worn cameras. I know there's a number of bills this session regarding body-worn cameras. We worked very closely with, at the time, Majority Leader Ford and also Assemblyman Harvey Mumford on their bills several sessions ago regarding body-worn cameras. In 2013, LVMPD was the first major police department in the country to engage in a body-worn camera pilot program. We had challenges. We had to get union buy-in from our line troops there was a reluctancy in the beginning for officers that felt like everything they did throughout the day was going to be scrutinized, and they were reluctant to put on body cameras. But the fact of the matter is that body cameras are a win-win. They're good for the officer and they're good for the public. And now, after we've been engaged in this process for a while, I don't personally know of any police officer that wants to go on the street and put on a uniform and deal with the public that doesn't want to have a body camera on when they do that. In 2020, we had 893 officers that were cleared from complaints of wrongdoing by body camera footage. We also had 136 officers that complaints were sustained against them because of body camera footage. And what we found is that we'll have folks call in and say, you know, this officer did something, treated me unfairly, was unprofessional, was rude, took my property from me and didn't return it, threw me on the ground, and I'd like to file a report. And the detective will say, okay, please come down. We'll have you fill out a statement and we'll take a look at the body camera footage from the incident. And quite often the person says, oh, you have body camera footage of that. Don't worry about it. I don't want to file a complaint after all. Like I said, in many cases, we've actually had officers fired as a result of what we found on body camera footage. So it's a win-win for the public and the officer. Other areas of police reform that I wanted to touch on real quick. Our use of force policy update never stops. In fact, about a month ago, we upped our use of force policy. We've had for over a year now, prior to AB3 in the special session, we had a meeting in policy. We also had a duty to provide medical assistance and to place someone in a recovery position. We had an early intervention program. We have what's called Blue Team on Metro, which allows a supervisor to monitor complaints of use of force against an officer. And if we start to see a pattern, the supervisor can step in and address that situation early on, whether it's a training issue or whether it's a disciplinary issue, and we can deal with that through that Blue Team process. We also have implemented mandatory training on ethics, values, bias-based policing, discrimination. I actually, just before the legislature started, I got my mandatory training on bias-based policing and discrimination. It was a very good training program that was done. We also have implemented civil unrest training, and I'll talk a little bit more about civil unrest in a few minutes, but we completely revised our policy on civil unrest. And again, I'll go into more detail on that. There's actually an after action report that we've released that I will provide you a link to. And then we removed the LVNR neck restraint from our policy. Again, we actually were moving to do that prior to the implementation of AB3 from last special session. We've made some changes to the use of force board. We allow members of the use of force board who are civilians to respond to the scenes of officer use of force so they can see firsthand what occurred at the scene. We have stronger criteria that we've implemented for officers and supervisors. And we have a body-worn camera policy and compliance report that comes out where if an officer falls below in their compliancy rating, that can be addressed quickly through supervision or discipline. And then we've established a behavioral health unit to deal with training officers the mentally ill. Again, I'll go in a little more detail on that on a later slide. And then we're in the process of constructing a regional training facility. Once completed, this facility would allow state-of-the-art best practices training for not only Metro, but for other agencies across the state. I think there's about 80 different law enforcement agencies in the state that could benefit from this regional training facility, which we are working very hard to get built. And it would provide, in addition to de-escalation training, reality-based training on, how to prevent officer-involved shootings, how to prevent use of force, and how to deal with different scenarios. Our Office of Community Engagement, as I stated earlier, it was established to support the department's commitment to building relationships with the community. As we all know, relationships are very hard to build. It takes a long time to gain trust and to build relationships. And as we saw last year, relationships can be instantly can be instantly lost. All it takes is the actions of one officer across the country to damage trust that we've been building for literally years. So our community engagement team focuses on outreach. We focus on trying to get community members into our Citizens Academy. We expand on the traditional community policing model. We have a philosophy on Metro that community policing is the responsibility of every officer, and that when we go out on a daily basis, we put on the uniform. We're not going out to be reactive to crime and respond to calls, but rather we're going out to problem solve and to help prevent situations from occurring in the future and to work in partnership with the community on that. And they also get actively engaged in the faith-based community. You may be familiar with a program called RECAP, where when we have an officer involved, or not an officer involved, but we have a community shooting, like say a gang shooting. The RECAP team has some faith-based folks that are part of it, and they will go out into that community, knock on doors, meet with community members, meet with the public, and try to prevent retaliation in those situations, because what we often see is one shooting leads to one or two more. And we believe that program has been very successful over the last several years in reducing shootings in neighborhoods and helping lower violent crime. Some of the community programs that we have, and I would encourage you in the interim to get engaged in some of these programs. We have our First Tuesday events, where every Tuesday, first Tuesday of the month, you can go to the area command that's in your district. You will meet with the area commander, the captain of that area command. It's open to the public. Anyone can come in. They can raise concerns about what's going on in their neighborhood or in their community, concerns they have with the police department. They can meet face-to-face the officers that work in their jurisdiction and get to know each other on a first name basis. When I worked community policing years ago when I was in a uniform, I attended every First Tuesday event. And we had a lot of folks that came every First Tuesday, and we knew them by name. Oh, hi, Mr. Jones. Hi, Mrs. Smith. And it was great to know folks in the community by face. And so if you get a chance to go to those first Tuesday events, please do. I won't go through everything on this slide, but our Neighborhood Watch program, our Explorer program, I have a slide on that in a minute. Our Hispanic Citizens Academy and our regular Citizens Academy, I would encourage you. I know Chairman Yeager from the Assembly Judiciary Committee participated in a Citizens Academy, and I think it was an eye-opener for him, and he enjoyed that process. So if you get some spare time in the interim, I know your time is busy, but please get engaged in some of those programs to learn about your police department. I'm going to talk quickly about diversity. Again, another area where we can improve. Our numbers don't necessarily match the community as they should, but I think that we've made progress over the years. We currently have, as you can see on the screen, about 33% female workforce, 19% Hispanic, 10% Black. Asian community is very underrepresented on our department. We are trying desperately to recruit in all these areas, but also specifically in the Asian community. COVID has impacted our ability to recruit. Obviously, the traditional method of recruiting was you go to schools, you go to career days, and maybe you travel to some other jurisdictions and you try to recruit folks face to face. But with COVID, a lot of that came to a screeching halt. So we've been, our recruiting section has been working on social media recruiting, webinar type recruiting, and other methods to try to reach youth in our community and get them engaged in wanting to be a police officer. Unfortunately, right now, it's hard. It's hard to recruit people to be police officers. Either A, people don't want to be police officers for whatever reason, or B, in some cases, they want to be a police officer as a stepping stone. Maybe they want to have a decent job for a year or two while they go to school and get a degree, and then they want to go on to become an attorney or go on to do something else. And being a law enforcement officer is not a career option. It's a stepping stone option. And there's nothing wrong with that philosophically, but we want people to make law enforcement a career. We want people to be with us for the long term, 25, 30 years, and dedicate service to the community and not just use us as a stepping stone for some other career. So again, more work in this area needs to be done. I want to mention too that when it comes to recruiting and promotions and those types of things, our human services section is very engaged in ensuring that all of our processes are validated to avoid adverse impact on minority members of our workforce and the community who are trying to become officers. And we report biannually, I believe it is, to the EEOC federal guidelines on hiring practices and making sure that we're top of the tier again when it comes to recruiting and trying to get people on our organization, but it's tough. So if you know people in your community who want to be police officers, or if any of you are tired of this legislative stuff and you want to be police officers, you know where to find us, and we're welcome. We would welcome you. Juvenile diversion. Again, I'll quickly go through this slide. Policy in place now that for delinquent acts and minor juvenile criminal activity, our officers are to make every effort to divert youth, especially first-time offenders, into the harbor and family justice system rather than incarceration. The goal is to stop that, what people often call, pipeline to prison type thing, where we're diverting kids away from the criminal justice system. And the harbor has been very beneficial when it comes to that, providing resources to help get kids who might be on the verge of going down the wrong path and on the right. And it's a step in the right direction there. So emergency vehicle operations is another area of reform. Back in 2009, when I was actually up here attending a legislative session, we had several police officers who were killed due to vehicle collisions. We realized that we had a problem on our agency. with number one, a culture of not wearing seatbelts. Officers had this old school mindset that, you know, if you had a seatbelt on, that you wouldn't be able to get it off in time and somebody was going to kill you in your car, and that you shouldn't wear a seatbelt because it was an officer safety issue. That was obviously a myth. There's no data to support that wearing your seatbelt results in officer death. In fact, wearing your seatbelt saves officer lives, because many officer-involved deaths per year are a result of traffic collisions. So we undertook a program that we call 365 Alive. The purpose was every day during briefing, officers would receive information on safe driving practices, the importance of wearing your seatbelt, the importance of driving slow. We had a slogan that we put on the wall that said, if you don't arrive, you can't assist. And it's better to get there slow and be able to assist someone than to rush and try to get there fast, and as a result, kill yourself or kill someone else and never get to the call to be able to help. And so I think we did a good job of changing culture on the department. We had a 34% decrease in officer-involved traffic collisions. In 2013, we were awarded Safer Way Award after we had a 41% reduction in vehicle pursuits. We also overhauled our vehicle pursuit policy to restrict when officers can pursue. And how a pursuit would take place if we do pursue, and it would only be in those cases where there's an immediate need to apprehend the suspect because they pose a risk to the public or to safety. And then the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health did a study of our policy, and so we made progress there in reducing accidents. As you know, mental illness is an area where we constantly struggle. Law enforcement officers, unfortunately, are often the first line when folks get into crisis. And we have a program in place where we train now every officer who goes through the police academy receives CIT training, which is intervention training. They're trained on how to de-escalate, how to deal with the mentally ill. They are dispatched on all calls where someone's in crisis, either potentially threatening suicide or they're off their medication and they need assistance. And to put it in perspective, in 2020, on this slide, it says we have approximately 30,000 calls a year. Actually, we had 45,788 calls in 2020. And we had 10,968 legal 2000s, which if you're not familiar with the legal 2000 process, the legal 2000 is an involuntary commitment for individuals who pose a threat to themselves or someone else. And the goal is to get them into see a doctor and be evaluated by a doctor. And in some cases, simply getting them back on their medication will help bring them out of crisis. But if they don't get that treatment or help, we've seen that in some cases, the numbers have been as high as 40%, I believe, where officer-involved shootings and use of force, the person that was involved in that had some type of mental health issues. So it's a very critical area that we need to address to lower our use of force. We also put together, last year, we've been working on this for a couple years, but it was proposed in 2019. It's still a work in progress. 4 officers, 2 corrections officers, and a clinician and a case manager to monitor our legal 2000s to look for crimes. Chronic cases would be those individuals who we've had more than 3 or 4 calls on them, and they've been legal 2000. And how do we go out and be, again, proactive and preventive? Let's not wait until they're in crisis and we're getting called out because they're armed with a knife threatening to hurt themselves. Let's get engaged with them with a clinician. Let's go out and make contact and see if we can get them in touch with services or in touch with medical professionals that can assist them and prevent future problems that might occur. And again, the goal is to prevent incarceration. We don't want the Clark County Detention Center to be a mental health facility. And if we can prevent incarceration and prevent violent encounters with law enforcement, that's a step in the right direction. Homelessness is another area where we struggle. we have a multi-agency outreach resource engagement team, which we call MORE. It's made up of 8 officers. Their job is not to go out and harass the homeless or go out and cite and arrest the homeless, but rather their job is to go out and make contact with folks that are living on the streets, try to get them into services, try to provide them help. Even if it's as simple as we have a lot of folks that, quite frankly, are resistant to help. They don't want to get into the system and try to get services. And so officers try to build a relationship with them and to build a rapport to where eventually the officer may contact the person on the street 3, 4, 5, 6 times, and they may refuse services or refuse help. And then ultimately on the 7th, 8th time, finally they agree to services and help once the officer's built a rapport. And so as you can see from the slide, last year we had 20,462 contacts from our MORE team, and we provide services to 6,213 people. And ultimately we got 760 people help, which resulted in them getting off the street and getting some type of a roof over their head. So the Clark County Detention Center, we have an average daily population right now of, it's actually dropped a little below what's on this slide. I believe it's 2,861 now. If you saw this presentation 2 years ago at the last legislative session, we were at an average daily population of 4,000 something. We've had a significant decrease in our jail population. Bookings have decreased by 13% since 2007. A number of factors are at play here. COVID was a part of that, but the fact is that our jail population was decreasing prior to the COVID pandemic. If you look at the bottom of the slide, you can see that on average, about what's important here is about 54% of our bookings are felonies. And at the bottom there, about 39, almost 40% of our bookings are misdemeanors. Now, understand that we have a policy on Metro that low-level misdemeanor offenses such as trespassing, traffic violations, those types of things, we do not book those individuals. We cite them. If an arrest is warranted, like in some cases, you can't avoid an arrest. For example, someone's trespassing on your property. They've been given warning. They were given a ticket. They leave. 5 minutes later, they're back. You give them a second ticket. They leave. Then they're back. The only way to solve that problem is, unfortunately, to take that person into custody. And so in some cases, you must make an arrest. Our policy states that a supervisor will approve any misdemeanor arrest. That is not a mandatory arrest. Now, keep in mind, too, that we have domestic violence, we have DUI, and some juvenile situations, I believe, that are mandatory arrest, where the officer doesn't have a choice, where they have to make an arrest per statute. So that 39% of arrests, a lot of those are mandatory arrests. But where this becomes important is when you look at the second section there on the right, it is the daily population. Even though the bookings, 40% of them might be a misdemeanor offense, only 11%, a little over 11% are staying in jail and part of the daily population. And that 11% would absolutely be, in most cases, your DUI offenders, your domestic violence offenders, or folks that have a court hearing coming and they've been denied release for some reason. So the point here is that most misdemeanors, the vast majority of misdemeanors, are on the front end either A, not getting booked into the jail, they're being cited, and B, if they are booked into the jail, they're not staying in the jail for a significant period of time. They're not a significant portion of our daily population. We're always looking at alternatives to incarceration. Right now, we have around 943 offenders on average that are part of the electronic monitoring program. We've been working to beef up that program since COVID came about. So the more people we can get out and get on electronic monitoring, the better. We actively participate in a number of programs. Pastor John Ponder's program, Hope for Prisoners, is outstanding. He's obviously received national recognition for that program, and we've been partners with him on that. We have services from the Veterans Administration, Social Security Administration, and then in, I believe it was the 2017 legislative session, then Senator Tick Seegerbloom assisted us with carrying a bill, SB 268, which allows us to help inmates get ID cards through the DMV before they're released from custody, so that once they're released, they can get services, they can cash a paycheck, they can do things on the outside, and they're not being released with no identification, which has always been a problem for people trying to get back on their feet. And I should mention too, before I go to this slide, that at the bottom there, we have a contract with a reentry service provider that prior to someone's release, they are interviewed, and any way that provider can help them with services upon their release, they're directed and funneled to those services. We've also had a very robust educational program and diversion program in the jail. Unfortunately, again, COVID put a stop to the in-person programs. We were able to continue some programs virtually, but on average, about 6,827 inmates participate per year. These programs, again, helping individuals get their high school education or adult education, and anger management, life skills, Alcoholics Anonymous. We have religious-based programs helping with PTSD, anger management, stress relief. But unfortunately, right now, most of those programs are being done via video conference and virtually, just as this meeting is. Our Sheriff's Civil Section and Constable Bureau, they handle civil actions that come through the department for service. By statute, the sheriff's responsible for certain civil services. The Constable Bureau, one of their main functions, eviction notice service due to COVID. They had an 83% drop. Obviously, there was a moratorium on evictions during the pandemic, and I believe it's still in effect. And so the Constable's Bureau was not going out and doing evictions like in past years they normally would be doing once ordered by the court. But they have other services that they provide, such as writs of execution. They respond to cases where you have the junk car that's been on your street for 6 months, and you want to get rid of it, and you call that in. Those get diverted to the constables, who would go out and cite those vehicles and have them towed off of the street if they're a danger or if they're abandoned. And then the sheriff's civil process, these are sheriff's deputies that cover all of Clark County. They handle about 9,000 cases a year. They serve protection orders, domestic violence orders, and stalking and harassment orders. I can't say enough about our volunteer program. We have about 500 volunteers. These men and women are fantastic and selfless people. If you've come to our headquarters building to visit, you've probably seen them in the front office. They'll take your name badge and let you in the building and give you a visitor pass, or they'll direct you to sections of the department if you need to get a police report. They go to our First Tuesday events. They go to our community engagement events. They're just great men and women who love to serve, and they get absolutely no compensation for all the hard work that they do as far as monetary compensation. Our Explorer program is a program that has been in effect for a number of years. We try to recruit young men and women into this program between the 16 to 20-year-old range to get them hands-on. What they do is they learn what policing is about. They learn how to do car stops. They learn law. They learn constitutional law, search and seizure. And then they actually participate in competition with other Explorer programs. I would consider it kind of like a higher level Boy Scout, Girl Scout type group that's more focused on law enforcement activity. And a lot of these young men and women go on to go to the police academy and become officers. So if you know any young kids who want to get involved in law enforcement, send them towards our Explorer program. So as I finish up the presentation here, I got a few more slides. I want to shift gears and talk about challenges that law enforcement is facing. Some of these numbers on this slide are national, not local, so I'll clarify when I get to those. But on a national level, last year, 264 law enforcement officers died in the line of duty. 145 of those deaths were COVID related. We actually at Metro lost 2 employees due to COVID. Unfortunately, first responders, law enforcement, as with fire and paramedics and medical personnel in the hospitals, we didn't have the luxury of being able to work from home. You have to be out there handling situations, and in many cases becoming face to face with people. And sometimes those folks had COVID and passed it on to our employees. And so that was a challenge. As you can see, it was a 96% increase in deaths over 2019. We also saw nationally 144 police officers killed. 45 of those deaths were by suspects with firearms. And the source of this information is listed at the bottom there. It's the Law Enforcement Officer Fatality Report from 2020. We saw a slight uptick in violent crime, especially in our Strip corridor late in the year last year. There were a lot of news stories on this. We had not only a fear for the safety of residents that might be visiting from the community, but also folks coming from out of town and how it might impact people's desire to come to Las Vegas in the future and our economy overall. So we implemented a program called Operation Persistent Pressure, where we put a team of officers on the Strip every night, actively looking for anybody that was out trying to cause problems and engaging in violent behavior. As a result of that program, between September through December, we made approximately 1,200 arrests. We found that about 39% of those folks that we arrested were from out of state. They were individuals, many of them from California, coming to our Strip and thinking that they could cause problems and vent things, and then they were going to go back to California once they were done, and it didn't work out for them. They ended up in the Clark County Detention Center. And we got 64 illegal guns off of the Strip during that same time period. I think things have settled down a bit on the Strip now. We've gotten reports from citizens that it feels much safer down there, and we will continue to put pressure down there to make sure, as we do in all neighborhoods where we see ticks in violent crime, to stop that and to make our communities safe. We see social issues, mental health. I've already talked about these, but these are major challenges facing law enforcement. The role of law enforcement officers is not diminishing, it's increasing. As you see, as lawmakers, often we see bills that have some requirement in the law, and whatever it is, whatever that requirement may be, well, who's going to enforce this? Who's going to make sure that this takes place? Let's have the cops do it. So often we see more responsibility put on law enforcement rather than going the opposite way and having law enforcement more focused specifically on crime or criminal behavior. We also, as I said earlier, our homeland security threat is evolving. We're seeing more of your sovereign citizen types. We're seeing more domestic terrorism. But at the same time, what I would call foreign extremists, or your traditional terrorism stereotype of terrorism that from 9/11 has not gone away either. It's still there, and we have to be cognizant of it. And then one of our biggest challenges over this last year, as you all know, is public trust and negative media. After the unfortunate situation with George Floyd in Minnesota, Sheriff Lombardo immediately came out and denounced that situation. We worked with our community partners throughout that time, but unfortunately, people are angry, and I understand it completely, and we sympathize with their anger, and it impacts law enforcement across the whole country. So it's a challenge that we have to work and to rebuild trust. I want to talk briefly. I'm not going to get too much into this, but One of the challenges we had over the summer was protests and civil disorder. Quite frankly, our policy on protests, we had not had any violent protests in our communities for a significant amount of time. Most of the protests that our officers had dealt with prior to last summer were culinary type protests or peaceful protests, not civil unrest situations. We had, since May of 2020, we had 318 protests into the end of 2020. The first initial protests that we had in those first days were the ones that primarily had situations that turned violent. I will say the vast majority of protesters that were out there were peaceful. They were law-abiding. They wanted their voices heard, and our officers have to balance the First Amendment rights of the people to go protest and make their voices heard, with also ensuring that the public and the protesters are safe, and that laws are not violated, and public safety is maintained. As you can see from these pictures, these are all pictures that were taken during the first few nights of protests out there. We had a patrol car set on fire. We had individuals that showed up with baseball bats. We had individuals that showed up with frozen water bottles that they threw at officers. We had bricks thrown, rocks thrown. We had some information that people came out the day before and strategically placed items along the path that they were going to march that could be picked up and thrown, so that they wouldn't have to carry those items on them. They could pick them up as they were marching. We had sticks and signs. People showed up with shields, as you can see in the pictures. But again, the vast majority of the protesters were peaceful. We learned a lot from these early protests, and as a result, we updated our policies and our procedures. There is on LVMPD.com, we have a report, looks like this, that we released. It's an after-action report that outlines lessons learned from the protests. I would encourage you to go to the website and read it. It also has our new updated policy inside of it, which you can read, which is a number of pages long. One of the key elements that we learned was to try to get out in front on communication, meet with the organizers of the protests beforehand, designate who are your legal observers, who are the media, have a better plan for dispersal orders. We updated our policy to require that multiple dispersal orders be given unless there's an immediate threat to life or safety, and that an egress route be given. I'll let you all take the time to read the policy. I won't extend this presentation too long by going into great detail, but we completely revamped our policy. And after those initial protests, throughout the remainder of the year, we saw very little violence or problems at our future protests. And I'll say this too, philosophically, if someone is angry at, an employer and they want to protest and they go to the street to make their voices heard, the employer is not the one who has to go out and stand in front of them and maintain the peace. If someone is upset because they have to wear a mask and they're mad at the governor, or they're mad at the legislature or the health district, when they go out to protest and they're angry and they make their voices heard, it's not the governor or the legislature or the Health and Human Services that has to go out and maintain the peace. But when people are angry at law enforcement and they're upset at law enforcement, unfortunately, law enforcement are the ones that have to go out and maintain the peace. And there's just a recipe for anger and violence to possibly occur because of that unfortunate situation. So our attempts are that we want to stay out of sight, out of mind, unless illegal activity occurs where the protesters are taking over streets or blocking vehicles, which we've seen from other protests around the country. People get run over. Typically, when the crowd takes over a street, things turn ugly and people get injured or killed. As long as the protesters are not violating the law and they're marching and protesting, we stay out of sight, out of mind, and we only make our presence known once things rise to a level where there's a public safety concern. And I think that that's been a big help in trying to keep the peace and avoid violence at these protests. Basic crime statistics. Overall, we saw a 13% decrease in crime, which is not the national average. In some places of the country, they saw a 40% increase in crime last year. But in our jurisdiction, our men and women did a great job of policing the community, and we saw a 13% overall decrease. However, we did, as I said, we did have a slight uptick in some categories. Murder was one. We had 99 murders last year. We had 12 more than in 2019. Our aggravated assaults were also up slightly, 4%, almost 5% increase in aggravated assaults. So we've got, again, work to do to push those numbers down and try to reduce violent crime moving forward. The sheriff's number one priority is reducing violent crime in our communities. And I'll close out my presentation with this. I know I've thrown a lot of information at you. I know people say, oh, Metro, says this or says that, but they don't really do it. Here's what I would say to you. Don't take my word for it. Come out and see firsthand what we do. Go on ride-alongs. Get in a car with our men and women. Go handle calls for service with them. See how they handle domestic violence cases. During the civil unrest, I know of at least one county commissioner who came out and stood on the line with officers. I know a number of legislators or lawmakers, I shouldn't say legislators, but I know lawmakers went out in many cases and marched with protesters, and that's great. But do the same with our officers. Come out and stand with officers and see what they're seeing from their side of things. Visit our Fusion Center. Visit the Clark County Detention Center. I will give you a tour. I know you're busy now and you can't do it, but in the interim, reach out to me. Anything you want to know about our agency, it's your police department. We have an open door, and I will answer your questions and show you anything that you want to see. Just reach out to me and we'll make it happen. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I know I've thrown a lot of stuff at you, but I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Callaway. Members, I know that was a lengthy presentation, but I don't know that we can have a conversation without getting all that general broad overview topics. So again, thank you, Mr. Callaway, and I understand life got in the way, so I appreciate you making time to come and hang out with us today. And thank you for the work you do. I think all of us share the sentiment that while we may think that there's more work that needs to be done, we're grateful and appreciative of the work that's being done by our women and men in law enforcement who are out there well-intentioned trying to take care of our streets. So thank you for that. We have a bunch of questions, so I'm going to go ahead and start off with Assemblywoman Brown-May.
Thank you, Chair Flores. Thank you, Director Callaway. So first, I would like to say thank you for your 32 years of service to our community and to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. That is just truly exceptional. Really appreciate much of what you do. I've had an opportunity to interact with many of the volunteers and officers that are just learning how to become involved in community. I have two questions. That was a lot of information, so I'm still kind of taking it all in at this point. Specifically, I want to talk a little bit about where you went with body cameras and the importance of body cameras to both protect the officers from false complaints and to uphold private citizens from valid complaints. I'm curious to know, can you talk to me about who wears body cameras? What's the current policy? We've often noted that not every officer has a body camera, not every off-duty or plainclothes officer rather has body cameras. We're seeing the importance of that. I think Jorge Gomez is one of our most recent examples about the value behind body cameras. So that would be my first question to you, sir. And then secondly, if I'm that private citizen that goes in that wants to file a complaint and it is valid, right? I think it's valid. And I take the time to go down, as you've talked about, to file the complaint. to get footage from a body camera, to get the video, how long does that process take to do that so that we have access to that? That's my second. And I'll just give you the third. You talk a lot about training of your officers, which is exceptional, and I have been a participant of some of that. But I'm curious to know if you could talk to us about what types of training. Is it in person? Is it training that's done through a PowerPoint, right? And you talk a lot about mental illness, but I didn't hear a lot about folks with developmental disabilities or autism, and how is that addressed in the department?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you to Assemblywoman Brown-May. Those are great questions. So I'm going to start with the first one on who wears body cameras. That's probably the easiest one. So as I said, we worked closely with Majority Leader Ford on his bill, which in statute requires that officers who are in uniform and routinely interact with the public as part of their day-to-day duties per statute must wear a body camera. So obviously that would be our entire patrol force would have a body camera. So that's number one. Initially, when we first implemented body cameras, the union felt that it was a contract negotiable type thing. And so we had a period of time where we made it a stipulation that if you're hired by a certain date, you're going to wear a body camera, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And now I'm happy to say that all of our uniformed officers who work the streets and deal on a day-to-day basis with the public wear a camera. They're issued a camera when they go through the police academy. However, other sections of our agency also wear cameras. Like, for example, the gang unit, they may not always be in a uniform, or they may be in a khaki kind of uniform. They may be doing undercover operations, but if they're going to interact with the public, the sheriff has made it clear that he wants them to have a body camera. Same with SWAT. If SWAT is going to a barricade situation or a hostage call, SWAT is equipped with body cameras. Even though they may not be out on a routine basis interacting with the public, they're specific for a tactical situation, they will have a body camera on. You mentioned the Jorge Gomez case, and obviously I don't want to get into specifics of a certain case, but as a broad example, sometimes, like October 1 is a perfect example, you have an active shooter on the strip who's killing people, and officers may jump out of bed, throw a uniform on that's been in their closet for 2 years and they haven't put it on, and they run to the scene to try to help, or they go to the headquarters, to the command post where they can be assigned to positions. And on a day-to-day basis, that officer doesn't wear a body camera. Maybe he's a detective who sits in an office. Maybe he's like me, who's here appearing before you. On October 1, I threw a uniform on and I went to the command post, and I was at the command post by 11:30 that night in a uniform. I was also out in a uniform the night of civil unrest after the George Floyd incident, late May 28th or whatever it was. I don't have a body camera. I put on a uniform 3 times a year: Police Memorial, September 11th, and October 1 are the 3 times I put on a uniform. So I don't personally have a body camera. Is it possible that during that night that I responded to October 1 that I could have encountered a citizen and maybe had to make an arrest and the citizen resisted and something occurred and I didn't have a body camera? Yes. But in the vast majority of cases, our officers that are in a uniform who day-to-day deal with the public are wearing a body camera. To your second question, filing a complaint, if I understand the question correctly, the process that we have in place through Metro is that all complaints are looked at to determine if there's a need for an in-depth investigation, and complainants are contacted. So if you were to call in and say that the officer did something on a car stop, took your property without your permission, or was rude to you, or made you get out of the car, or whatever, you file a complaint against the officer. The internal affairs investigator will take your complaint and they will log it, and then they will determine if it warrants the supervisor investigating that, or if it warrants the internal affairs section investigating it. Obviously, if something's a higher level, like a criminal allegation, then the internal affairs section will handle that. If it's a what would be called a lower level allegation, like the officer was rude, or the officer had a bad attitude, or the officer put his hand on his gun when he walked up to the car. Those things may be investigated by the supervisor at the line level. We try to keep the complainant involved in the process of the complaint, but obviously sometimes if we find that there's no violation of policy or the officer's actions weren't necessarily wrong, people are upset for whatever reason. They got a ticket, they didn't like the officer's attitude, and people may not be happy with the answer they get from the internal affairs investigator, that they feel like they were treated wrongly. In those cases, they have the option of taking their complaint to Citizens Review Board. So there's a number of processes there. And then outside of our agency, obviously, law enforcement officers get sued for everything. So sometimes people, if they don't get the answer they want through the complaint process, they have the ability to take civil litigation against our agency or officers. As to the body camera footage you mentioned, I think the time varies on a number of factors. So we set up a public records unit after last legislative session. In fact, there was a public records bill that went through Chairman Flores's committee, your committee. And as a result of that bill, it put stipulations in the law on how long an agency has to provide a public record and whatnot. So we put together a public records unit, and that unit takes all those requests, and there's two processes in place. The statute allows for body camera for you to come down to our body camera section and sit in a chair at a monitor and actually view the camera footage. If you want to get an actual copy of the camera footage, then there's redaction that may need to take place, and you may be put in the queue below other people who are ahead of you with similar requests. So I can't give you a specific time that it's going to be 24 hours or 48 hours or a week, but we do our best effort to get whatever records have been requested to the person requesting in a timely manner. And then your third question, training, that's a huge area. So in the academy, officers undergo 18, 19 weeks of very in-depth training in the academy level, and that includes both classroom instruction, and it also includes in the field practical problem instruction, where there's role players and they're doing scenarios with the role players, and they're being graded and they're learning in those scenarios. It covers the gambit from, I could provide you the curriculum if you'd like, but it covers the gambit, everything from constitutional policing, search and seizure law, bias-based policing, how to do a car stop, firearms training at the range, defensive tactics, firearm retention if someone's trying to take your firearm away, safe driving. The list could go on and on and on. How to, criminal law, what's a misdemeanor, what's a gross misdemeanor, how to write a citation. Again, I could go on and on and on. After an officer graduates the academy, then they go to the field training program. The field training program is another, and they change the time frame depending on how much training is involved. So I'm saying 18, 19 weeks. It may be longer now. But the field training person goes with a field training officer, and they actually respond to real calls for service. And during that time, the field training officer, as they go through field training in the beginning stages, the field training officer is doing most of the work, and the trainee is observing and learning. And then as they progress through field training, the roles reverse to where the trainee is now doing most of the work, and the field training officer is observing and rating the trainee on how they're doing. And so there's a lot of training that takes place during that part of the program. They actually get a field training manual that has areas that they are required to learn in field training, like actually, because it's one thing to do a car stop in the academy with a role player, and it's a totally different thing to go out on the freeway and actually stop a real citizen on a car stop. And so being able to do it in a classroom environment does not always equate to being able to do it for real. And often we have people that they get out in field training, they do great in the academy. They're top of the class in the academy. They get out in field training on the street, and then they say, oh my God, this is not for me. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be a cop. This is too dangerous or whatever. I don't want to do it. and they quit after they get in the field training program. And then after field training.
Can I interrupt you 1 minute? I really appreciate your answer. Sincerely, I do. My question is relative. I've been in my position for 20 years in private, in a private nonprofit, and I go through mandatory training every year. So I'm curious to know, for long-term officers, what does that training look like for them?
Yes. Thank you, Assemblywoman. I was getting there. Sorry. I'm laying the groundwork. So after field training, officers throughout their career have mandatory annual training that they must do. And that includes post-training, which is, I think it's a number of hours that they have to do per year. And then Assemblyman Speaker Frierson actually had a bill last legislative session that implemented mandatory training in certain areas, such as de-escalation, bias-based policing, use of force, officer wellness. And so we have two types of programs. We have an in-person training that officers can sign up for. Some of it's mandatory, some of it
Broadcast, I believe we lost him.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, did I lose you?
I think just momentarily. I think one of the last things I heard you say was you started to get into post-training.
Yes.
And you cut off right after that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry about that. My internet's not the greatest, but
It happens, no worries.
we have to meet mandatory post requirements every year. In addition to, I don't know if you caught it before I was disconnected, but Speaker Frierson's bill implemented certain criteria that officers must do for training every year. And we have two processes: in-person training in a classroom. And then in addition, we have virtual training that can be done through our UMLV program, which is online, to where an officer can sign in and take a class. They have to mark that they have, it tracks the time that they're in the class to ensure that they're actually doing the class and not just logging in and saying they did it and logging out. They have to meet the time requirement for the class as well. And so there's basically, to round up my answer to you, Assemblywoman, and I'd be happy to go into more depth and get you a breakdown of all the training. It's a lot. Officers go through a ton of training, and a lot of it's mandatory for me as well. I have to go through. I haven't worked the street in 13 years, but I have to go through defensive tactics training and firearms training and a lot of these trainings that are post-required. I have to go through every year, even though I'm not working the street. But I'd be happy to get you a breakdown of all that training. It's quite in-depth.
Thank you, Director Callaway. I look forward to following up with you offline. Thank you very much for your answers. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Assemblywoman. Next, I'll go to Assemblywoman Constable.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Director Callaway. I appreciate all of the time that you're taking this morning to talk with us and all of the tremendous amount of information. I have a separate question, but before I get to that, if that's okay, I wanted to follow up on Assemblywoman Brown-May's question. You talked about the body footage camera, and I'm glad to hear that someone can come in and view the camera footage for free. But I guess my question is, when is that available? And is that raw footage what someone can watch, or has that already been redacted? And how soon would somebody be able to watch that?
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Mr. Chair, through you. I think that my belief is, and I'll verify this, but my belief is that footage is redacted because we have to protect the privacy of individuals that may be inadvertently caught in the video. The example would be, if you were, say I was on a car stop with you where you had done some minor infraction and I was in the process of writing a ticket. And while that's occurring, something happens over here that I have to take action on, and my body camera is activated. The incident that I had to take action on, obviously, is the incident that the person wants to come in and look at. but you're also on the camera, and maybe your driver's license is in my hand, and maybe we can see into the car, your purse is on the seat, and personal property. And so we want to ensure your privacy. So we need to redact in some cases, juvenile information. We need to redact information of a personal nature so that to protect people's privacy. So my belief is, and I will verify, but my belief is that even if you come in to watch the video in person, that our video team has taken efforts to redact it to ensure privacy.
So then how long does that process take for someone just to come in to watch it?
Chuck Calloway again for the record. I believe that it's based on my conversations with our unit that it's fairly quickly, like probably within, if you made the request today, I think within maybe 48 hours they could get you in to see the video, as long as they have the time. I think that again there's a number of factors that come into play. How many people have made requests ahead of you? If it's a busy time period, I will say this. One of the top body camera requests that we get now is when a lot of these bills pass, we don't know the unintended consequences down the road. And one of the big requests we get now is from insurance companies or lawyers regarding traffic accidents. So on a daily basis, we may get numerous requests because an insurance company wants to see body camera footage at a traffic accident. So you may want to see body camera footage from a criminal incident or something, a complaint against an officer, but you may have 15 insurance companies ahead of you to see body camera footage. And we basically treat those on a first come, first served basis. So I can't give you a specific time, like every time it's going to be 24 hours, but I will say it will depend on number of factors based on how difficult it is to redact the video, and also who may be ahead of you in the queue to view video, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Thank you. And then a quick follow-up in this area. So if that's the process, then what's the difference between that process and timeline and someone who is requesting the video that has to pay for it? So if it's like, is there additional redactions? Is there additional requirements between being able to see it for free? And then what has to be done to add that additional cost for somebody to buy it?
So Chuck Calloway again for the record. So my understanding, and again, I'd be happy to, after this meeting, put you in touch with our unit that actually does this on a daily basis, so they can give you a more clear answer. But my understanding, having had discussion with them on this issue, is that every case is different, and there may be tons and tons of body camera footage about one incident, or there may be very little body camera footage. So, for example, October 1, we had literally thousands and thousands of hours of body camera footage from different angles because we had hundreds of officers down there, and all of them were wearing cameras and different stuff being filmed. So if you're where I'm going with this is if what the information you're trying to receive is simple, it's a simple 10-minute stop with one officer. It should not be very hard for the officer that works in that unit to pull that video, redact it. If it's in the system and you're just coming and sitting at a table and looking at it on the screen, it's my understanding is it's relatively easy just to pull it up to do the redaction. However, if you want an actual copy of it and we have to send it to another file and we have to burn it or whatever it is they do, put it on a drive. I'm not sure how they give you the actual physical copy now. I can certainly find that out. But my understanding is it's a little more time consuming to actually burn it or put it on some type of a drive to give you an actual physical copy versus having you come in and sit down and look at it on a screen. And then again, like I said, it depends on how much footage there is. If there's 6 officers on the call and there's 6 body camera footage and the incident lasted 5 hours, there could be a tremendous amount of footage that the officer has to go through and ensure is redacted properly.
Thank you. And the reason that I was asking is last week we had a presentation from the Washoe County Sheriff's Office, and they brought this up, and they specifically had like a cost for the thumb drive and then a specific cost for the editing. So that's why I was wondering if this is like a consistent across the way, or if it's just like a one flat rate.
Chuck Calloway again for the record. We also charge a fee based on the statute, I believe, that was passed last session, designates what fees can be charged. And so the fee is based on the time and to produce that record, I believe. So I could certainly find out what the fee is. But again, I think it's based on the record and the time it takes to retrieve it and redact it and all those factors.
All right, thank you. And I thank you for answering those questions. And I'm happy to follow up with you on those. My other question is in a different area. On the slide that you're talking about inmate education and diversion programs, under the adult education, I know you said that this is virtual learning right now, but do you have enough information about adult education to let me know when you say adult education, is that only for the folks in prison that don't have a high school diploma to get that diploma, or is there additional like training or education to help them get job ready? And if so, who pays those costs?
Chuck Calloway again for the record. It's both. My understanding, Assemblywoman, is that it's both higher education for folks that may need like a GED or may need some type of college education for a higher level. And then also is job related. So Hope for Prison, my conversations with John Ponder, I believe that program is specifically tries to plug inmates into job skills. So if you've always wanted to be a carpenter, for example, there may be a program that you could get into that would help you learn some of those skills. And so there are job-based programs. I believe, and I don't know, I will follow up as far as cost. I don't want to say there is no cost or that most of these programs are done on behalf of nonprofit groups. There may be some costs. I will find that out and I will let you know.
Thank you so much. I appreciate both of those answers, and I look forward to following up with you in the future. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you,
Assemblywoman.
And thank you for your questions, Assemblywoman. Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Calloway, for the information. Kind of looked over the PowerPoint a little bit last night and again this morning, so I did have a few questions that are directly related to the PowerPoint, and then I've got a question that's related to some other areas. The first question from the PowerPoint, on slide 18, there was an assessment of the collaboration work between CRI and TAC. That link simply took us to the main page. It does not actually have the report on there. So if you could just get an updated link, that'd be great, where we can actually read that report that is being referred to in the PowerPoint on slide 18. I'd greatly appreciate it.
Oh,
just
absolutely.
wanted to give you that little heads up.
No, Chuck Calloway, for the record, when I made this PowerPoint, that took you to the reports, so they must have updated it. So I will verify and I will get that link to the committee.
That'd be great. Thank you. And then the other element had to do with slide 31 and 32. Assemblymember Constable already brought up one little thing, but I did have a question. The Hope for Prisoners program sounds very positive, and then also does some of the other programs that are being offered. Just out of curiosity, are there any sort of classes that are being offered for parenting programs? Because as an educator, that is something that some of my students sometimes experience, are their parents being in prison and ways to do outreach between the two. So are there any programs, do you know of, that are being offered?
That's a great, Chuck Calloway, for the record. That's a great question, Assemblywoman, and I'll be blunt and honest, I don't know. I will find out if there are parenting programs. I can get a breakdown of what actually the classes are that they teach, and I will provide that to the committee.
That'd be wonderful, and thank you so much for that follow-up. I think that based upon your slideshow, which, by the way, I hope you have a glass of water near you, because, wow, that was a long speech. Thank God. Okay, good. But I don't think any of us are expecting you to have every single answer at this time, but that follow-up would be wonderful. My last question is more about the building itself, or the buildings, excuse me. When it comes to the other agencies, the relationships with them, whether that is Harbor, which in Washoe, it's more CBS or Child Behavioral Services, or other areas such as ICE, what is that relationship like? Is there a desk actually in those police offices, what is the processing? How do those two agencies or other agencies work with Metro in getting the necessary services?
Chuck Calloway for the record. So I'll talk about ICE in a second, but the other entities like the harbor, we, in some cases, different, it's a very broad question, but I'll try to answer it as distinct as I can. In some cases, we have MOUs with other agencies or other entities. We may have an MOU with the harbor on what Metro's role will be. We have the MOUs or agreements we have with these entities on what role Metro plays and what we agree to do and what they agree to do. So we're going to bring juveniles that have committed a very minor offense or they're first-time offenders, and we're going to take them to the harbor and we're going to agree that we're not going to do this or that, and we will do these things. And then those MOUs usually outline specifically what every agency's role is in the agreement. And we have those agreements, like, for example, with the BLM on incidents that may occur out on, Bureau of Land Management, incidents that may occur out on public lands. Who handles those? If, search and rescue type stuff, is this the sheriff's responsibility or is this federal law enforcement's responsibility? And so in most cases, I won't say all cases, but in many cases, we have MOUs with those agencies. Our MOUs are all done through our general counsel section. So they're the ones that sit down and draft them and complete them, and they outline what role we all play. So to the first part of your question, yes, we have agreements with many entities. Some we don't. If we don't deal with them a lot, we may just have verbal agreements, or we may have, like, for example, an agency or an association like TIPS, for example, or maybe a language translation hotline. We may have a contract with them, or we may have a verbal agreement to use their services, but we may not have an actual MOU. ICE is a kind of different animal in and of itself. So if you sat through my presentation or saw my presentation from last legislative session, I had a lot of questions about ICE and about our 287G program. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department had used the 287G program for years. We felt that the program was a good balance between protecting the public and ensuring public safety, and also not having our officers be immigration enforcement. We have a strict policy on Metro that our officers do not do immigration enforcement in the field, that we don't ask people their immigration status in the field, we don't call ICE out in the field on anything. And the 287G program, when we used it, was a jail-based program only. When someone was booked in and they were accused of a crime and they were in our facility, then we had a database that we used to query ICE's system to see if ICE wanted that person for deportation. And then we would communicate with ICE, and in those days, we would put a detainer on. So what happened was, to give you the Reader's Digest history, there were some court challenges to the detainer process, I think going back to 2013. And for a period of time under Sheriff Gillespie, we suspended the detainer program, where we were no longer detaining people for ICE. But what we would do is we would tell ICE, we were still using the 287G program at the time, but we would tell ICE, we have this person in our custody, they're going to be released. You have X number of hours to come get them, and then ICE would decide if they wanted them or not. As time went on, some of the court cases worked their way through Supreme Court, and we decided, a decision was made based on that we were going to go back to the detainer process. And so for a period of time, we went back to honoring detainers. In 2019, I say last year, time's flown, it was actually 2019. After last legislative session, a lot of questions were raised about unfortunate situations where someone has been in the country, maybe they're in the country illegally, but they're a law-abiding citizen, they haven't done anything wrong, they're trying to provide for their family. They get a traffic ticket that they don't pay, and then they end up getting arrested for a traffic warrant. And now they're subject to the 287G program, and ICE comes in and ICE deports them for this very minor offense. And obviously we had on a federal level, administrations changed and ICE's protocols changed while all this was going on. So Sheriff Lombardo back in 2019 decided that we would update our MOU with ICE to ensure that only violent offenders or people that had committed felony serious offenses, people that were a priority for ICE, would be subject to ICE detainers, and that somebody that just had a minor traffic ticket would not. We had dialogue with ICE. We worked on an MOU with ICE. There was some disagreement. ICE didn't like parts of the MOU. And in the meantime, there was a court case in California, which I can't remember the name of the case. I apologize. But based on the court case in California and based on our disagreement with ICE on the MOU, the sheriff made a decision, I believe it was October of 2019, to suspend the 287G program and to not use it. And so we stopped doing all detainers in October of 2019. We no longer honor any detainers, and we no longer use the 287G program. So as a result, under the 287G program, we had an office that our officers who were assigned to the 287G program used that database. But it wasn't like an ICE desk where ICE came in and sat at the desk. It was our officers who were implementing 287G. I believe that office has been cleared out and we no longer use that system. The 287G program has been suspended. We do no detainers. Now, with that being said, we communicate with all law enforcement partners, whether it's the FBI, the DEA, whether it's ICE, whoever it is. If ICE tells us, hey, you have somebody in your custody that we think is a priority for us and we want that person, we will not do a detainer, but we will tell ICE when they're about to get released. Well, the guy's getting out Monday at 4:00. If you want him, be outside and grab him when he goes out the door. Those communications may take place, but we no longer do the 287G program. And I hope I've answered your question. I didn't mean to go off on a complete history lesson of 287G, but I think those questions were going to come up anyway, and so I thought it was important to clarify.
And thank you for the history. I come from a family where if you ask somebody where the bridge is, first you find out how the brick was made. So I get that. We do have a few. I just want to make sure that I understood your answer though correctly. Number one, only individuals who have serious criminal violent crime are the only ones that are detained. Is that yes or no?
No. So Chuck Calloway again for the record. When we used the 287G program, the sheriff wanted the MOU to reflect that only we would only honor an ICE detainer for somebody who was I hate to use the term, but the worst of the worst, the guy that had committed a felony crime, or the guy that had significant criminal history, or the person that had was a priority for ICE. Like, ICE has their priority levels. We would not detain someone, put a detainer on someone based solely on the fact that ICE wants them and all they did was a traffic offense. ICE, we could not come up with an agreement in the MOU, and then we had this court case. And so currently we do no detainers for ICE.
No detainers.
We're not doing any detainers for ICE right now. No detainers at all.
Right.
So if ICE calls us and says, hey, you've got Chuck Calloway in custody and he's a bad guy and we want him, put a detainer on him for us, we're going to say, no, sorry, but we'll tell you when he's getting out and you can grab him as he goes out the front door. But we're not doing any detainers.
So, and I realize that the MOU or Memorandum of Understanding was never actually signed. It's what it sounds like from the two. But can we get a copy of that MOU so we can get so we can get that background knowledge? Is there a way to be able to get that?
Yes, Chuck Calloway for the record, Assemblywoman Anderson, I can get you a copy of the MOU agreement we had with ICE. We had discussions about revising the MOU agreement to reflect the changes the sheriff wanted. but those revisions never happened because we were having those discussions when the court case occurred. And then we decided just to suspend the program. So I can get you a copy. I can get the committee a copy of the original ICE
Great.
MOU.
And just to verify, there is no written agreement at this time. That MOU is now been, the prior MOU had an end date, and or there has been an agreement that is no longer, whether it's in writing or a handshake, is no longer enforced, if I'm understanding your answer correctly.
Yes, Chuck Calloway for the record. The MOU, as most MOUs, I believe, have, I'm not a legal guy, but I believe most MOUs have a clause that allows, because it's an agreement, it allows either party to decide they no longer want to be part of the agreement. And that's exactly what happened here. We suspended the program. So the MOU is null and void as far as we're concerned. We're no longer doing any detainers. We're no longer participating in the 287G program. It's suspended.
I have so many other questions, but I think that I know that there's many others on the committee that do as well. And thank you very much. And I might be contacting you to do a little bit more background as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Assemblywoman.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Calloway. It's really been very informative. Your presentation was extensive, and I just want to divert back to a couple of slides that perked my interest. And one of those were Metro's diversity with their officers. I'm showing you you have like 33% female, but I was looking, what are the breakdowns for, Hispanic? I show that you have Hispanic 19%, 10% Black, 6% Asian. So what in those groups are female versus male? That's question one. And within the ranks, what's the promotion like? When you were saying that, this is Metro's like a stepping stone to go on to different, go finish school, become an attorney, doctor, whatever. What's the incentive to keep your officers there? What's the promotion rate? How long does it take a female to get promoted? A female of color to get promoted? How many females of color do you have in higher ranks where they are leaders over at Metro? Thank you.
That's a great question, Assemblywoman. Chuck Calloway for the record. So you're correct. The breakdown on the slide is just a basic overview from our annual report regarding general diversity. When we talk about the hiring, and I had a long conversation with our human resources section regarding the promotional piece. As you know, hiring people are looking for some type of a decent job where they can have good benefits and they've got some income coming in, and then obviously people usually that want to become a cop or want to become a police officer, they have a genuine desire to make a difference in their community or to help others. And so people come in are at it on that slide. We're actively recruiting. The sheriff has an African American Recruitment Council that is actively engaged in recruiting. We have a LGBTQ Recruitment Council. We have an organization called Women of Metro that goes out and actively recruits females. We have our Hispanic Recruitment Council, the Black Police Officers Association. So on a front end, we're desperately trying to recruit those folks, and I have those numbers. I can get you a breakdown. I don't have them here in front of me right now as far as how many, for example, Hispanic women versus non-Hispanic women. I don't have it broken down to that level yet, but I could get those numbers for you. When we get into promotion, it's definitely something that we're cognizant of and we're looking at, and we make every effort to ensure that our promotional exams are fair and have no adverse impact on any section of demographics. But promotion is also voluntary. Like myself, I'm a sergeant. In addition to being a director, I'm a sergeant, but I waited a long time in my career before I tested for sergeant. And then I took the lieutenant's test and I failed it. So, it's as you go up, the tests become harder and harder. I don't know that we have a distinct breakdown of how after promotion those numbers look, but I will check with our HR section and see if I do have that. And if I do, I will definitely provide it to you and to the committee. But I think the important note there is that we follow all the EEOC guidelines, the federal guidelines, and we use a validated process for ensuring that all of our promotional exams and promotional processes don't have a disproportionate impact on any segment. And if we see any indications that there are, like, it's difficult for a certain segment to pass these exams and get promoted, then we take every action to fix that problem, whether it means eliminating that part of the exam or whether it means revising the exam so that part does not have a negative impact. And our folks in HR use all the federal guidelines, and we submit a report to the federal government every other year on that. I will call them and see if I can get a breakdown of the numbers as far as in the weeds, how many women of each demographic and promotional as well. But I just don't have it with me today.
I appreciate that. And Chair, I have a couple more questions.
Please follow up, Assemblywoman.
Thank you. When you mentioned training and how, your officers there's a mandatory post-training, there is virtual training. Something that has always perplexed me. I am a former, a retired veteran, but until the day I retired, we had to do physical fitness qualifications every year. Mm-hmm. And if you failed, then you went into, of course, mandatory fitness every day until you pass the fitness qualification. So that's that question. Your officers, is it mandatory, just like post is mandatory? Is physical fitness qualifications mandatory? And with that, your officers, when you are going through the process of recruitment, they, if they make it that far, they have to have a mental health assessment. And is it just a one time? You're an officer for 20 years. You only take a mental health assessment one time. Is there, is it like post that you have to take it mandatorily yearly? Are your officers also have mandatory health assessment and physical fitness assessment yearly?
Yes. Mr. Chair, through you to Assemblywoman Thomas. Those are great questions, and thank you, first of all, for your service. I really appreciate that. So on the fitness side, we don't have, obviously there's fitness requirements to get into the academy, but after field training in the academy, there are no, like you have to run a mile every year, you have to do so many push-ups every year, but we do have an annual physical, and that physical involves going into UMC, seeing a doctor, being evaluated, doing a treadmill exam, doing a chest x-ray, and a number of things. And if the doctor, and I've actually had him tell me this before, hey, Mr. Calloway, you're a little overweight this year. For your age and for your height, You should be 180 and you're 190. So I'm going to write this out that you have to fix this. And if you don't fix it, then, basically, if something happens where you get injured on the job or you have a heart attack tomorrow, it's noted in your file that you were told you have a health issue that you didn't fix. So there's that component where, you're seen by a doctor and you have to comply with the department's health standards via your physical annually. However, there's no run a mile in that stuff. Secondly, there is, and I don't know, before I go further, I don't know if that would be something that would be subject to collective bargaining. Like, for example, let's say tomorrow the department said, we're going to implement an obstacle course and push-ups and sit-ups. The union might come and say, whoa, that's collective, that's subject to collective bargaining. I don't know if the department could just implement that on its own, but that would be a further discussion. Secondly, as far as a mental health examination, you are absolutely correct. You get a mental health examination when you're hired, both an in-person interview with a clinician and also a written mental exam. But then later in your career, you do not. And I've had conversations with other lawmakers. In fact, Assemblywoman Moreno has a bill, I believe, that would implement that. And we do, however, have what we do have is we have a robust officer wellness program. So we have peer counselors. We have a program called PEEP, and it's the Police Officers Assistance Program. And it's peer counselors, and it's folks that have some training in recognizing somebody that may have suffered, may have symptoms of PTSD, may be suffering issues on the job. And supervisors are responsible for if they see behavior. For example, I'm a supervisor and I've got an employee on my squad, and maybe all of a sudden he starts calling in sick a lot and his work performance decreases and he just seems to have a bad attitude. I have the ability as a supervisor to refer that person to the PEEP program, to where a counselor can sit down with him and talk to him and see if there's any issues going on in his personal life that might be impacting job performance. And then if there is something identified, to direct them to programs to assist them. We did a lot of this type of training after October 1, because we had a lot of officers that, saw some pretty gruesome stuff out there that night, obviously. And so we had a program in place to, number one, some mandatory programs where officers had to sit down and go through a training program with some clinicians that came to our agency. But I'm answering your question in a roundabout way. We have some methods in place to address officer wellness that includes mental health issues, but we do not require an annual mental health evaluation.
Thank you for that answer, but I was just I'm happy to know that Assemblywoman Monroe Marino has a bill that she's working on to get that assessment for officers. And the only reason why, you want the overall wellness of your officers to be out there, at least I do, when they're dealing with the public, because a few slides later, you were saying that your officers are trained to assess without a degree, the public when they may be having mental health issues. And, it's kind of like, I think that our officers, should be under that at least assessment. If you have a mandatory post where you have a weapon, and sometimes our officers see some horrific things happening, and some of our officers have, alcoholic problems. Life happens, and to have a mental health assessment, I think would be a good thing. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director Holloway, for me taking that liberty to make that comment. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Martinez.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Director Callaway. So the question that I have is, do you currently ask anyone in your custody where they're from? And is that information provided to the public?
Chuck Callaway, for the record, when you say in custody, are you referring to when they're booked in the jail, or are you referring to when an officer stops someone in the field?
I guess when they're going to the jail.
Okay, Chuck Callaway, for the record, when someone is booked into the jail, number one, we have an obligation to confirm their identity, and that's done through a number of methods such as fingerprinting and looking at the criminal history. You know, do they have tattoos? Do they have marks or scars? Some people will obviously lie to us about their identity. So on the front end, it may be a question that is asked, where are you from? Because if the computer says that, you know, Chuck Callaway's from Indiana, and I'm being booked in, and I say, oh yeah, I'm Chuck Callaway, and they say, well, where are you from? And I say, I'm from Baltimore. Well, the computer says you're from Indiana. You know, it would give us an indication that somebody might be lying about who they are. So that question could be asked as part of an investigation. The other side of it is that when someone's booked into the jail, we have an obligation through the State Department. There are some countries that require consulate notification if their citizens are arrested. China is one example of that. So in cases where we may arrest someone who potentially is a Chinese citizen, we may, in the course of questioning, ask them where they are from to determine if the consulate needs to be notified. Now, whether to the last part of your question of is that public record, a person's booking sheet that is filled out, we call it a TCR, a temporary custody report. The TCR that is filled out may have a box on there of, you know, where they're, I don't remember if it has where they're from, but it may. But that document is criminal history, so it's not a public record. There are some, like the media, for example, can request it in certain cases. The media can get it, or you know, attorneys, obviously, if there's a case pending. But as far as just the general public, no, they wouldn't have access to that TCR.
Follow-up, Chair?
Follow-up, please.
So if there are foreigners, would they be subjected to a different booking process or detention process in the jail?
Chuck Callaway, for the record, no, the booking process would be identical. You know, potentially, like I said, I could be asked where I'm from too. If I'm being booked in and the jail person has reason to believe during the course of interviewing me that I might not be telling the truth about who I am, or you know, that I might you know, be lying, that they might ask me a question of, well, where are you from? Where were you born? I think probably the question would be, the actual question would probably be, are you a United States citizen? Like if I'm booked in and I don't speak, I'm speaking French because I'm from Canada and I don't speak a lot of English, they might say, are you a US citizen? Because they want to confirm if they need to contact the consulate. In many of those cases, we're required by federal agreements to contact the consulate. So they wouldn't undergo any kind of different booking process that anyone else would undergo. The process would be the same.
Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Duran.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Callaway, for your presentation. So my question goes back to ICE. How do they know when, or how do you know that a person is wanted or to know that they're wanted by ICE? Number one, I guess, is there a list or something that they send you?
Chuck Callaway, for the record. So when we had the 287G program, we could access that database to see if they're wanted. Now we no longer use the 287G program. It's suspended. So unless they have a criminal ICE warrant that's entered in NCIC or some other database that we access, I think there's one called Offender. There's a number of databases that we use that are federal databases like NCICC, just unless they've entered a criminal warrant, we would not know. We would not know if ICE wants them.
Oh, I don't know. Can I get a follow-up, please? If you can.
Sure, Assemblywoman, follow up.
Yes, so for just to understand is, in the past 5 years, can you tell me how many people were, how many individuals were held due to ICE warrants? And isn't it a civil liability to hold these people? And just a follow-up question with that, in how many payouts has Metro been sued before, and has it been settled, and for how much money?
Chuck Calloway for the record. To your last question first, are you talking about regarding detainers and ICE payouts? Not all payouts, but just detainers for ICE stuff?
Yes, for a person that has sued Metro for being detained.
Right. Okay, I will find that out for you. I don't have that in front of me today. I will also find out 5-year data for detainers, because as I said, as of October 2019, I believe was the date, we no longer honor detainers. We suspended the 287G program. So since 2019, October, we have not detained anyone for ICE. Prior to that, there were periods of time where we were honoring detainers, and then there were periods of time where we didn't honor detainers. So I will get the 5-year numbers for those years of who was detained for ICE, what those numbers were. I believe I can get that for you. There was another part of your question, trying to remember what it was.
Is if there was if Metro was sued, and how much did it cost for Metro to pay up for, if there was a settlement, I guess.
Yeah, I don't have, I'll get that for you. I don't have the numbers on settlement payouts today. I'm sorry. It seems like in my brain, I thought there was something else you asked, but it was the payouts, which I'll get for you, and the 5-year detainers, which, like I said, we have not held a detainer since 2019. So I will get you the numbers prior to that. And then, I know what it was. It was the, aren't they civil in nature? So going back to when the detainer issue, that's one of the reasons why we stopped doing detainers under Sheriff Gillespie, was because the courts had ruled that the detainers were civil in nature, and that you could not, it was a violation of the person's constitutional rights to hold them on a civil violation. ICE, I believe in the following years after that, that was around 2013, I believe, ICE took effort to change their detainer process and put language in their detainers that the courts believed constituted probable cause, which then there was the agreement that if the detainer had probable cause in it, then an agency could hold. The courts determined, okay, there's probable cause, you could hold the person. So at that period of time, I want to say 2014, 2015, I don't remember the exact date, we started honoring detainers again for a period of time. And then until 2019, when we said program suspended, no more detainers. And I should say this too, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department is the only agency in Nevada that utilized I shouldn't say only, there may have been a rural area, but we were the primary agency in Nevada that used the 287 program. Jails, like jail, the North Las Vegas jail, the city of Las Vegas jail, they did not participate in a 287G program. So they were not using a specific program with regulations and rules outlining how it operates when it came to these types of situations of dealing with detainers. And I don't know, I'm not pointing the finger or saying, that they did things wrong or anything like that. I'm just saying they were not operating under the 287G program, which we believed set very strict parameters on how somebody could become subject to that program and could potentially get a detainer placed on them.
Just one quick follow-up. Since you said that, so we adopted, or Nevada adopted the 287G also as well, or you just followed California suit?
Nevada, we participated, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department participated in the 287G program. There were a number of agencies around the country that participated in the program. We didn't adopt the program from California. There were some other programs out there like safe communities or secure communities, I think under the Obama administration, but we did not participate in those programs. We strictly used the 287G program, and October 2019, we suspended it. Sorry, I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but we suspended it in 2019. So
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I look forward to getting that data.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. And next we'll go to Vice Chair Torres.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Callaway, for your presentation today. I really do appreciate it. And I want to begin just by prefacing and saying thank you to the work that Las Vegas Metro Police Department has been doing throughout COVID-19. I know specifically in my district, officers have really played an important role in helping with like food, the food programs in our community, ensuring that traffic is controlled. One of the sites is very close to my residence. And so I know that sometimes the lines get out of hand, but our Metro Police Department has really stepped up, and specifically the Bolden Command, to make sure that we're able to keep everybody safe during that time. So I really do appreciate that. I have two separate questions. One is going to focus specifically on kind of the discussion earlier, and then I have one that's a little bit different. And so I know, Mr. Callaway, that you've spoken a lot about how the detainer program has ended with the end of 287G. But I just want to echo some confusion. In the Nevada Independent article that was posted on January 10th, 2021, and I can send the article to the committee secretary for the purpose of the minutes. But when I look at that article, it does talk a little bit about the different detainer programs. Obviously, there are some districts or counties here in Nevada that continue to use the 287G program. And my understanding is that Metro does not use the 287G program. Nonetheless, I'm also understanding from immigration attorneys on the ground and immigration advocates that there are still types of detainers and there are ICE detainers, and that those detainers are not just for individuals that are violent criminals, but rather that the detainer program has been applied kind of judiciously. And so I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because I'm just not understanding. If we know that there's been ICE detainers in the last 3 months, if you could talk a little bit about that agreement, and if we're just operating off of good faith, or I don't understand why we would have some type of detainer program between Metro and ICE without having anything in writing. That wouldn't make sense to me as a lawmaker, or as, you know, when I'm making an agreement with an insurance company, I make sure that I have it in writing. So it seems to me that this agreement then is without anything written.
Chuck Callaway for the record, Assemblywoman Vice Chair. So as I said earlier, I reached out to our jail, to the booking area, and to the director of personnel at our jail. And I was told that we no longer, since October 2019, honor ICE detainers. We're not detaining anyone for ICE. Now, as I said earlier, if ICE becomes aware through whatever ICE does, obviously they're their own entity, they have their own methods of investigation or whatever they do. If ICE becomes aware that we have somebody in our custody that they want, and they know when that person is going to be released, yes, they could potentially show up at CCDC when Chuck Callaway is getting ready to be released and walk out the door, and they could say, all right, Chuck Callaway, now you're coming with us because we're going to try to deport you. I don't know, the terms, if ICE is considering that a detainer, or if the immigration attorneys are considering that a detainer, that process, if ICE shows up and grabs me as I'm coming out the door, if that's considered by whoever wrote the Indy article as a detainer, we may be getting, into, debate over the term. But from our standpoint, the term detainer is an official detainer document that has been given to us by ICE requesting that we hold someone for them, meaning that when they would normally be released and walk out the door, they're not being released and they're not walking out the door. They're being held for maybe an hour, 2 hours, 72 hours, 48 hours, so that ICE can show up and get them. We no longer do that. We no longer hold and detain anyone for ICE. If they walk out the door and ICE shows up and gets them, that's, you know, if someone is interpreting that as a detainer, that may be part of the confusion there.
How did they become aware? Director Kelly, I apologize to interrupt, but then can you explain a little bit about how they become aware? You mentioned earlier that sometimes there's like phone calls and things like that. So I'm just wondering then what that agreement is if they're becoming notified of when they're released.
Chuck Calloway again for the record. And as you stated earlier, Vice Chair, you're absolutely correct. That's why we, when you talked about you should have MOUs and you should have outline and agreements. And that is the reason why we embraced the 287G program in the past. You know, we were under a lot of scrutiny. It seemed like we were constantly getting bombarded as an agency regarding the 287G program. When that's the point I was trying to make earlier, when we were the only agency in Southern Nevada that actually had agreements and had things on paper outlining how the process worked. And obviously that program is now suspended. I can't speak for ICE. I don't know how their people do investigations. I don't know how they determine if somebody in the jail is somebody they want. You know, I know that there's a number of methods that someone could figure out who's in the jail. You know, even citizens, if they have a potential name, can go on the website and find out if somebody's at the Clark County Detention Center. So I can't speak for ICE and what methods they use to try to find out who somebody is in custody that might be on their priority list. All I can speak for is what we do. And I know that we are no longer honoring official detainers. You know, we're not holding anyone for ICE. If they get them when they go out the door, that's ICE's protocol. I hope I'm making that clear.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then follow up if I may, Chair, for a different topic.
Please follow up.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Calloway, for your response. And I have a question regarding slide 35. It's the slide titled Major Challenges Facing Law Enforcement. And I just wanted some clarification looking specifically at the numbers that say leading cause was COVID-19 and attacks on police officers. My understanding based off that report, that would be national data, correct?
That is Chuck Calloway for the record. You're absolutely right, Vice Chair. You're correct. That's national data. I haven't got to the slide yet in my notes, sorry, but the 264 officers that died in the line of duty was national data. And that's from the law enforcement officer fatality report. And the leading cause of death for those officers was COVID-19. 145 of those were COVID-19. That is national data from the national report.
Okay.
So I apologize for any confusion there.
Thank you. And if you could just get us the numbers for Nevada, I think that would be helpful as well.
Okay, and on that note, as I said, we had 2 employees on our agency, I believe 1 civilian and 1 officer that died from COVID. I don't know about other agencies in the state. I could look into that for you. I don't know if the state has, I'm assuming that data is somewhere in the state, and I'll see if I can find it. You just wanted COVID deaths or you wanted all officer deaths?
Both of those numbers that are indicated from the LEU report. If you get them from Nevada or from, Metro is completely acceptable as well. Thank you.
Okay, for Metro, we had no line of duty deaths last year, I don't believe. And obviously we had Officer Shay McLeanis who was critically wounded, but so let me backtrack. We had our lieutenant who passed away from COVID, that was listed as a line of duty death. So I don't want to misspeak. So we had 1 COVID related death that was an officer, and that is counted as a line of duty death. But I will make sure I get the official numbers for you.
Madam Vice Chair, I just wanted to confirm you don't have a follow-up, correct?
Sorry, it takes me a second to find the unmute. No, I'm good. Thank you, Chair.
Understood. Members, we do have a question from Assemblyman Matthews, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Calloway, thanks for your presentation, for being here. I just wanted to make sure I understood correctly on something you said a moment ago. It sounded like you were saying that the prior participation in the 287G program was sort of helpful in terms of getting official practices codified on the record, facilitating transparency because you were able to make official some of what the department was doing. Is that a correct characterization?
Chuck Calloway for the record, Mr. Chair, to Assemblyman Matthews. Yes, sir, that's exactly what I was saying. The 287G program, number one, we had an MOU that outlined how each agency interacted. We had, and the sheriff was in the process of trying to update that MOU to reflect concerns that were raised in the community. It was strictly a jail-based system. The goal was, and I think we all share the same goal, is if we have a predator or somebody that's a violent offender in our neighborhoods, regardless of where they came from, and there's an opportunity to get them out of our neighborhoods, I think we would all think that's a good thing. Certainly our agency does not want to break up families or see people deported for minor things. And the sheriff was actively working to ensure that didn't happen. But under the 287G program, yes, we had strict parameters in place through that MOU, and we had very clear details of what each agency, what their function was in regards to that program, whereas other jails had no program. So, the vice chair mentioned that, ICE could potentially walk in and say, oh, we want this guy or we want that guy, and there's no parameters. And the 287G program was under scrutiny a lot, and it was under the magnifying glass, and rightfully so. We want to be transparent. And we want to have a program that, maintains public safety, but doesn't injure community trust and partnerships. So I'm being long-winded, but yes, you're right.
Thank you. Yeah, I could certainly see where that kind of accuracy and accountability would be very, very valuable. So thank you, Director. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you, Assemblyman. And Mr. Calloway, I appreciate all these answers, and I appreciate you indulging all the members in such a wide array of topics. And I know that we went into some stuff that you got to go back and check in with your folks. So I appreciate that as well. Mr. Calloway, I don't want to get too far into the conversation of the 287G program, the detainer. You've been more than clear on the fact that you're no longer operating under the 287G agreement and that you're not enforcing detainers. And I appreciate you kind of thoroughly going through that. But am I correct in my assessment that because we no longer have a 287G program and MOU, and because we no longer honor detainers, that there is now a free range per se on how to procedurally interact with ICE, how to procedurally interact with the federal government, with other entities? In other words, because we're no longer giving them strict guidance on how we're going to act, my understanding is we're simply saying we're no longer going to do the 287G program. We're no longer honoring detainers, but maybe between 5 officers who operate in 5 different shifts, there may be a different code of conduct and or procedure and or interaction with ICE because we're not giving them specific instructions on what they're supposed to do and not do in terms of that interaction. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Chuck Calloway for the record. So to preface the answer to your question, we communicate with all of our law enforcement partners, whether it's Department of Homeland Security, whether it's the Bureau of Land Management, whether it's the DEA, the FBI, any law enforcement entity that comes to us and says, hey, Metro, we're, the DEA, and we think there's a drug dealer operating over here, or we're the U.S. Marshals, and we think this is going on. We need your help. We're looking into human trafficking. We need Metro's assistance. With that being said, if ICE came to us and said, we think that you have this person in your custody that we want, as I said earlier, we will not detain that person for ICE, but we will tell ICE when we're letting them go. Okay, they're getting out tomorrow at noon. If you want them, be here. So in that regard, your comments are correct in the fact that we no longer have the guidelines of the ICE MOU through the 287G program to have a very structured process. So theoretically, on a graveyard shift, an ICE officer could come in and say, hey, I'm looking for this guy. I think you have him in your custody. And theoretically, the officer that's working that night may be very cooperative and may help determine if we do have that person in our custody. And then by contrast, the ICE guy could come in at noon the following day, and it may be super busy and the booking area is full, and the booking guy may say, I don't have time to deal with you right now, ICE. So yes, in that regard, you are correct. I can't speak for what ICE is doing on their side. All I can say is what our protocols are, and our protocols are no detainers.
Understood. And Mr. Calloway, if I could have a follow-up, under that same exact hypothetical that you just provided, where maybe in the evening versus the day, there may be a different type of interaction. Is it also possible that in the evening and in the morning versus morning, that the officer, the metro officer and or the facility, jail, whoever it may be, that they preemptively take it upon themselves to reach out to ICE? So I understand ICE saying, listen, I am looking for Edgar, and we think we want him, and then you'll share information saying he's going to be released tomorrow at so-and-so time. ICE will then take it upon themselves to wait for in that hypothetical Edgar to come out. But is there a scenario where preemptively, because we don't have any protocols, we don't have an MOU, we're not giving direction, we're not necessarily telling folk how to operate, where I, maybe who work there, could preemptively say, I think this individual needs to be somebody that ICE needs to look at, and I preemptively start sending information, even without ICE taking it upon themselves for asking for it?
Chuck Calloway, for the record, Mr. Chairman. That scenario is possible. I'm not going to sit here and say it could never happen. We have like I said, 900 and some corrections officers in the jail. Would it be impossible that one of them might believe that someone in our custody should be looked at by ICE and reach out to ICE preemptively? It's possible. I'm not going to say that it's not possible.
Understood, Mr. Calloway. Thank you for that. And again, I appreciate you indulging all these questions. I know a lot of folk, and even when you were doing your previous presentation in another committee, there was a limitation of time and folk had a difficult time getting to some of these questions. So I appreciate you indulging us. I'm going to open it up one more time, members. I know we've gone into 40 different topics. So if I accidentally skipped you and you wanted to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself, state your name for the record, and please get your question.
Assemblymember Anderson, and I did already have my question once, but I do have a follow-up question, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Please.
Okay, thank you. It's based upon the answer from Assemblymember Matthews, which I appreciated the question and also the follow-up answer for that. Earlier in the presentation, there was discussion about how Metro was created, that it is both the county, the city, and the other regions. So my question has to do with when agreements are being made or not being made, or even other decision-making processes, what is the governing body? Is there a public governing body that is elected by others that oversees this, or is there a hearing, or is it simply the decision of the sheriff, as was mentioned at the earlier in the presentation, excuse me?
So Chuck Calloway, for the record, Assemblywoman. So the sheriff is an elected official, elected by the people of Clark County. He oversees the department and oversees the Clark County Detention Center. I don't know exactly, but I think he got over 70% of the vote in the last election. So he's accountable to the constituents of our county. And the vast majority of decisions regarding our agency are made by him. He has an executive staff team that obviously he talks with and assists with those decisions. He doesn't operate in a silo. He works very closely with the Clark County Commission and with the City Council, with the mayor, with Chairman of the Commission, former Speaker Kirkpatrick. He has a very good relationship with all of them. He has a very good relationship with the governor. So on day-to-day discussions about Metro protocol and Metro procedures and policy, Yes, he's the ultimate decision maker, but he doesn't make those decisions in a silo, and he's held accountable by the voters of Clark County. In regards to our budget, as I said earlier, we have a fiscal affairs committee that's outlined in statute, and that committee oversees all parts of our budget in regards to spending, donations, allocation of revenue. That is all reviewed and approved through the Fiscal Affairs Committee, which is 2 county commissioners, 2 city council members, and a citizen at large. I hope that answers your question.
It clarifies many parts of it, so thank you so much for that clarification. I'm an open meeting type of person, so I was trying to figure out if people ever had that opportunity, and it sounds like they're able to do so through both their city council members, as well as their county commissioners, as well as the sheriff himself. So thank you.
And again, members, thank you for the dialogue, and I'll take this personal point of privilege just to, again, thank you, Mr. Callaway, thank our women and men in law enforcement. I know during this pandemic, I had an opportunity on multiple occasions to work with some of your officers on getting food, getting toys, we did bikes, dropping them off. I remember one occasion we were getting clothing for kids, and your officers were out there every single time folk asked for their help. They were out of their own pockets purchasing things and using different charity networks to help folk. I know that you did not necessarily get too heavy into that because you were trying to cover everything else. But I do appreciate all the work that you all have been doing during this pandemic. Obviously, it's been incredibly difficult on everybody, but especially your folk. So I just wanted to say thank you to them. And collectively, I think we agree that we want to make some changes and we want to see some things improve. But we understand that men and women put on those uniforms every day and are hoping to protect our city, state. And so we're appreciative of that. And we look forward to continuing this dialogue, Mr. Callaway, working alongside of you, ensuring that we're pushing for transparency and at the same exact time, pushing for protection for law enforcement. I think it's not a line in the sand. I think it's both sides. We push for transparency and accountability. And at the same time, we want to protect our men and women. So like I said, thank you again, Mr. Callaway. We'll continue this dialogue, and I'll go ahead and close out the hearing from the Las Vegas Metro Police Department. And next, I'd like to go to broadcast and ask that you please invite those wishing to speak in public comment. We'll go ahead and open up public comment.
Chair, the public comment line is open and working, but there are no callers at this time.
Thank you. I think Mr. Callaway did enough conversing for the entire state for today. Mr. Callaway, again, thank you. So we'll go ahead and close out public comment. Oh, excuse me, members, I want to remind you that tomorrow we'll be meeting at 9 a.m. And we'll be hearing 2 different bill presentations. Give yourself an opportunity to become familiar with those, review them, ask questions ahead of time. We'll be reviewing Assembly Bill 87 and Assembly Bill 147. And with that, members, again, I appreciate the dialogue today. This meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.